Okay, so let's kick things off with our first question to our panelists. And we're going to start with you, Jeff. And the question is, what are some of the warning signs, the red flags, so to speak, that a leader is becoming worn out? Jeff?
I think for me, I see is when you just dread going to work, and
Mhm.
you're no longer, you feel exhausted. Maybe there's a little bit of apathy, and then you just feel maybe even disengaged. And those are key signs for me. But when I dread it, I really know that I need to be looking at something to rejuvenate myself.
Mhm.
Because isn't it true, Jeff? Like when you kind of go into that space, you kind of become like reactive,
Yeah.
right? It's like when you dread going to work, you're not really creative. You become reactive. I think one thing that I think about is like people always
Mhm.
see you before they hear you, and
Mhm.
so it always like it shows up physically, right? Because people communicate a couple different ways, right? They communicate overtly and covertly, which means like what I say you hear, but it's like when the covert like doesn't match the overt. So like for example, like my wife will say, "Hey, what's wrong?" Or if I ask my wife, "Hey, what's wrong?" and she goes, "Nothing's wrong." Well, does that mean nothing's wrong? It means a lot is wrong, right? Because it's like her, her outsides doesn't match her insides. And so I think sometimes as leaders, like we need to look out at our teams and just notice them,
Yeah.
right? And just notice like, do they have energy? And you
Mhm.
know, what are their facial expressions? Because that tells a lot. It's like my outsides really tell on my insides. So
Yeah.
Leighton, that's a great question. Like Leighton, how do you see that? How does that work for
Well,
you?
I mean, in our world, a lot of it is, when a task is assigned to somebody, you can just see on their body language.
Yeah, yeah,
Will just express that.
yeah,
And right now, with isolation and COVID and stuff like that, it's very easy to just send somebody a text message as opposed to saying, hey, can we just jump on a Google Hangout? Can we just jump on a Zoom call for 5 minutes, and I'll just walk you through what I'm asking you to do here.
yeah,
And I could just watch their body language. If they just like, the classic things, shoulders shrink,
yeah,
uh, you know, like you can see the stress in their face.
yeah.
Um, sometimes there's too much like, what, we're all in it together. So let's just get through it.
Right.
And I know that it's very easy to say, you know what, I'll do it, as opposed to saying, well, I'm not asking you to do it for me.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm just asking you to recognize that, it's a real meat grinder right now.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because I think people want to feel understood. And I know in our age of Zoom, and we're on Zoom right now, right? But it's like
Yeah.
we can communicate content,
Hmm.
but it's hard to communicate context.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of what we're talking about as we're talking to, how do we help our leaders? It's like, how, what's the context in some of these things?
Hmm.
So that was a great question.
So if I was to maybe just capture some of those points, if I'm paying attention to this webinar right now and I'm thinking, okay, so hold on a second, okay, what are the things I should leave this discussion and go and kind of observe the behavior of my team? And so, Jeff, one of the things that you said was, you know, get a sense yourself, like, am I regretting going to work?
Yeah, dreading it.
If I am I dreading going to work? And then, I guess the question, how would you know if a leader on your team is dreading going to work?
Question.
I think when Monday morning, when Sunday night comes, if you're not excited about going to work, there's a sense of dread. Now, all of us enjoy the weekends, right? We all want to have our
Yeah.
time. But if we're just really, that's a good test for me. And I have
Hmm.
to ask myself, why am I dreading it? What's the barrier? Because
Yeah.
I love what I get to do, and it gives me energy. But there have been
Mhm.
times when I'm just like, oh, I don't want to go to work tomorrow. I have to ask why. And
Yeah.
once I figure out that why, then I have to address it. And it's amazing then how it clears up whatever it was that was hanging around my neck that was just pushing down on me, that pressure. And if I address it, then I can get through it pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
And as you're working with your leaders, like don't you sort of see like the words they say, because like that kind of tells like your heart is connected to your mouth, and so if it's like if there are things coming out of their mouth, like it really tells you the condition of their attitude. So I think even as a
Mhm.
leader, it's like also like watch the language of your team, because it'll tell exactly what they're thinking. And
Mhm.
in the first step to really creating culture is really fixing language, because language
Mhm.
defines culture. Once I understand language, or once I can create new language, it really starts to define my culture. So I think even as a leader, like also like watching your team, what do they say?
Mm.
You know,
And it's, I think there's two sides of that coin, because on one side, if you're exhausted as a leader and you hear somebody, let's say, complaining or doing, or like verbally wimping or limping, verbally limping, like what's a verbal limp? It's like, okay, you got it. Sometimes I'm like, man, I know I should address that, but I'm totally exhausted, And
yeah,
so I'm wondering, like, when you notice those moments where, you see a red flag in your leaders,
yeah.
but you're feeling worn out, do either of you have any thoughts on how do you dig deep and say, whoa, hold on a second. Hey, Carla, can you just hang back for a minute? You
It,
know?
it's very selfish as us as a leader if we don't address what we know we need to address. And
Yeah.
it takes courage. It takes
Mhm.
courage to do the right thing when we're tired. I mean, any of us are good on our on our greatest days, but when we're tired, that's when that's what separates us from the wimpy leader to the champion, right?
Mm.
And so from the whiner to the winner, and the winners are going to address it in their fatigue, and you've got to step back though and have an intentional strategy, because you can go in with guns blazing and shoot everybody when you're tired. So you got to be careful.
Yeah, isn't it true? I tell people all the time, it's like the tireder I get, the dumber people are. Isn't that true? It's like, and it really is just me like, hey, Dennis, you need to go take a break. Right. So I think, first, just, you made a great point. It's like making sure that you're in a healthy place. And I want to say something super hard. Maybe we can unpack it as we kind of go along. So here's the hard statement, is that whatever you don't address as a leader, you actually endorse.
Yeah.
Whatever you don't address, you endorse.
Absolutely.
And so you cannot play the ostrich.
That's
Right. It's because language and these behaviors, it's defining your culture. And there
So
are no
here,
bad teams. There are just bad leaders. So those are a couple of
me,
hard statements that make people mad, but maybe we can unpack them as we go along the road.